Okay, so welcome everybody, and today we're looking at Unit 3, Demand and Supply. And as I said before, um, you guys are seeing the slides, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so as I said before, demand and supply is probably the most critical aspect of um, economics, because in every other place that we go and we look at theories that come up later on, especially in macroeconomics, it uses a demand and supply approach to things. So this is it's critical that we understand these concepts here um, very well for us to be able to take the learning forward into other things. All right. Okay. So these, of course, are the learning outcomes. They are from your course outline. The ones in green down below, that self-directed. I believe you all have questions in your individual assignment that covers them. So that's how it's guided into self-directed. Am I lying, or is that the truth?
That's true.
All right. So in doing those questions, you all would be teaching yourselves consumer surplus and Veblen inferior and Giffen goods and that type of stuff. All right. So we're going to focus on defining demand and supply, illustrating graphically the laws of demand and supply, analyzing, explaining graphically and descriptively the impact of changes in price and non-price determinants on demand and supply, derive market demand and supply curves from individual curves or schedules, derive and analyze market equilibrium, and explain the operation of market forces in situations of disequilibrium caused by both changes in price and non-price determinant. Sounds like a lot, right? All right, so the first thing, everybody followed this definition, right? Demand is the quantity of a good or service that an individual is willing and able to purchase at a given price and given time. That makes sense, right? So if we analyze that thingamajig there, that definition, you'd realize that there are four um, conditions that exist. You have willing and able. You're all seeing that, right? So that's the first condition. You must be both willing and able. Willing means that you want to do it, and able means that you can do it. So able speaks to having in our case here, we're talking about the money, right? So you have to have the money to be able to do that. All right, the dollars. Willingness has to do with whether or not you have the capacity to want to do something. So for example, there are lots of things you might be able to do, but you're not willing to do anymore. That makes sense? So you might be able to buy 100 pounds of sweets, but that doesn't mean you're willing to do it. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Similarly, right? Similarly, there are things that you are willing to do, but you're not able to do. So you might be willing to buy a car, but you may not be able to buy a car because you simply don't have the resources for it. It's one of the reasons why we don't give children too much money, because sometimes they're willing to do some very questionable things with their cash. All right. So these two elements here have to be satisfied for demand to be measurable, because we are not interested in those things that we simply desire, but we are interested in those things we desire and have the capacity to buy or purchase or to execute. So in essence, what we're talking about here is, in economics, we actually refer to this as effective demand. So this is the type of demand that we want to look at, the effective demand that people have. So let's go to the next two conditions here. We have the conditions of given price and given time. Now, what that simply means is that the amount of a good that we are willing to purchase, that we're willing and able to purchase, will change if prices change, and will change also in difference of times. So I think one of the examples I gave was, when the price of any good changes, it goes up or it goes down, the quantity that we are actually being willing to purchase will rise and fall with the direction of the price. Well, in adverse in an adverse fashion, as we'll see later on. And similarly, when there's a change in time, so time could be wide, it could be hours or different parts of the day to different parts of the year. So consider, for example, um, what's going to happen for Christmas. There are certain items that during Christmas we're going to demand a lot of. That makes sense? That at any other time of the year we're not going to be looking for. Can you all give me some examples of that? What are we going to
Okay.
look for in Christmas?
Like the
Sorry.
marshmallows.
Sorry, a Christmas tree.
Yeah,
Gift paper, gift bags.
correct. Uh-huh. Somebody didn't say alcohol.
Marshmallows.
Marshmallows, yes. Those kind of things. Well,
The punch a cream.
yes, okay. But what would happen is at Christmas time, now we have a situation where two items that we tend to buy a lot more during Christmas time is apples and grapes. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Right. But given the change in taxation, import taxation on those types of what the government calls luxury goods, apples and grapes and strawberries and stuff. Not that the price is going to go up as a result of government taxation. What quantities do you think you would buy? Would you buy the same quantities as you did before, or would you buy less?
You may buy less depending on how much you increase the price too.
Correct, yes. So you can see right there that we've been able to illustrate that given time and given change in prices, the quantities of a good or service that we are willing and able to purchase will change. So that is breaking down this definition of demand. Making sense so far? So if you look,
So
any questions on this one?
the price didn't rise, but the quantity.
Say again, sorry.
You said for the grapes, the price didn't go up, right?
Yes, prices are going to go up because they've classified grapes and apples as luxury items and they're attracting
Okay.
a new import tax.
So that is why we're buying less.
That's why the price will go up because of the impact of a tax.
Okay.
And that tax, that increase in price brought on by a change in the rate of taxes will impact upon our willingness and ability to pay for and ultimately the quantity of that good that we're going to buy. That
Okay.
makes sense?
Yeah.
All right. Same thing we could also talk about in terms of the foreign use cars. That's going to become more expensive now as a result of government's treatment of it in the last budget. So this is one of the reasons why for your assignment 2, articles coming out of the budget might be useful for you all to utilize to look at what impact it's having on concepts like demand and supply. You follow me? All right.
Yes, sir.
All right. Somebody had a question? Nope. All right. So if we look at supply now, supply is the opposite of demand, but it is defined in a very similar manner. Supply is the quantity of a good or service that a firm, now this is the difference here, as opposed to an individual up here, we're talking about a firm down here. Firms are units of production. They produce goods and services. Is willing and able, so they have the same conditionalities here, willing and able to provide or produce at a given price and a given time. So these four conditionalities are the same. The firm must be willing to do something, but they must be able to do it as well. And the ability is not created by the amount of money that they have, but really the access to the resources that they have available to be able to make that good. So their ability here is going to be shaped by the access to resources. All right, you all know what the resources are, right?
Yeah.
Land,
Yes, sir.
labor, right? All right, so you all know
Factors
those
of production.
factors of production. Very good. So they access ECT or T, whatever. All right. Given price, so at higher prices, well, we'll see with the law of demand supply just now. They need certain profit levels to be able to produce goods and services. So therefore, the amount that they're willing to produce will be greatly affected by the prices they can sell it for, and of course, the time of the year when demand or capacity may be greater. That makes sense, guys? Yeah?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's move to the next.
Yeah.
So this is something, this was the discussion. So I added this here to compensate for the lack of a narrative. All right, so this here is really everything we spoke about that was sort of explained in this situation here. All right, so these narrative sections here we don't need to go through at this point in time, unless there's something here that we didn't cover before. Also, this is where the marshmallows came from. The oops.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Right. So I forgot I'd use this marshmallow. It's interesting, you know, in Trinidad, marshmallows don't really sell at any other time of the year but Christmas. And I was speaking to the one of the managers from AS Brighton, who's they bring in the craft marshmallows, and they were talking about it. The craft was talking to them about why aren't marshmallows purchased at any other time of the year? Why only at Christmas? And you'd realize that this situation with us for Christmas is really kind of a tradition thing, because it's that special time of the year. We look for different types of treats that are special for that time of the year, which is one of the reasons why apples and grapes became special as well, because we don't normally buy them at different at every time of the year. But of course, that's sort of changed now because apples and grapes have become more available at more affordable prices. We'll see how that changes as this comes up now. So we'll see how that works out. All right, so that brings us to the law of demand and the law of supply. So let's evaluate this. The law of demand states that for normal goods, as prices rise, the quantities demanded decrease. And as prices fall, the quantities demanded increase, ceteris paribus. So the first thing we should be asking here is, what do we mean when we say a normal good? And then we want to look at what does this term mean. So that's defined down here. Ceteris paribus is Latin for all else remains equal or unchanged. And this means that only the factor the only factor that is changing is price, all other factors remaining constant. So we know or we know that there are different things that impact upon the quantities of goods that we're willing and able to purchase. But we want to look at what happens when we change only one. Now, for those of us who remember, doing something like that, conducting experiments where we change one variable at a time, is part of the scientific approach to assessing and evaluating theory. You all remember that? Hypothesis testing in one of the earlier units. Yes?
Yes, sir.
Can't
You
recall,
can't
sir.
recall?
Yes, sir.
Hold on, I think somebody's trying to somebody's trying to get in. Hold on, let me see if I let them out. Right, Mr. Cooper. All right. Hello, Mr. Cooper. Can you hear us?
Hi, good afternoon, sir.
Hi, good afternoon. Just checking to make sure that you can hear us. All right. So we're going
Yeah,
through
I'm not.
all right. So we're going
Yeah.
through the presentation on demand and supply.
All right.
Okay. All right. So what we said is that in trying to demonstrate the law of demand, what we're doing is we're only going to be changing this one variable here, prices. All other factors or determinants that can impact upon demand have been held constant, thus the phrase ceteris paribus. Now, what is a normal good? Well, the question is, what makes you a normal citizen? Or are you all normal citizens? Would you consider yourselves normal people? Or are you abnormal?
I believe in the love.
You believe you're normal. Well, what makes you normal? Interesting.
So I feel like this normal
Loan
is different for everybody.
Not really. There are norms. Have you ever heard that word? That we tend to all follow. And those norms are usually based upon or determine our laws and rules. Making sense? So, in essence, what I'm trying to say to you is that for a good to be normal, it actually holds to this law of demand. You follow me? So normal goods are so classified as to be those that follow the law of demand. Now, we've asked you all to look at a number of other goods, Giffen goods, inferior goods, and Veblen goods that don't necessarily hold to the law of demand. So we call them exceptions to the law of demand. You all realize that, right? In your assignment, you'd have
Yes,
talked
sir.
about that. So those are abnormal goods. They don't follow the law of demand. So when we talk about a normal good follows the law of demand, and in this case here, the law of supply as well. Yes, sir. Question?
So when you was just saying abnormal goods, can you just repeat that line again, please?
Those abnormal goods are actually the goods that don't follow the law of demand. So that when prices rise for that good, quantities demanded don't necessarily decrease. In some instances, like for instance for Veblen goods, when prices rise, quantities demanded increase. Remember that? Similarly, for normal goods, when incomes rise, we did that with the indifference curves analysis. We said when incomes rise, the quantities demanded of a good will also rise. They will increase, correct? But the reverse is true for inferior goods. When your incomes rise for inferior goods, what happens is that your demand for it falls. And the reason for it falling is because you view or consider that particular good as being inferior. And there's a special form of inferior goods called a Giffen good, where the reaction is extreme. So in some instances for Giffen goods, you stop buying the good altogether once your income goes up or its price falls. So those are the extreme, as I said, abnormal goods. But any good to be considered normal must follow this law of demand, at least from that perspective. So far, so good? Yes?
Yes.
All right.
Perfect, so thanks.
So the same, all right. So the same applies for the law of supply, except that the law of supply is inverse to the law of demand or opposite to the law of demand, because it says that for normal goods, as prices rise, the quantity supplied increase, and when prices fall, the quantity supplied decrease, ceteris paribus. So again, we're making the assumption that price is the only thing we're changing here. Everything else that could affect supply is being held constant. But why do you think suppliers behave in this manner? Why would they increase their output when prices rise, knowing full well that the law demand is such that people will buy less when prices go up? Why would suppliers still want to supply more of that good when the prices rose?
So they could make more profits.
There we go. And that's because we're making another assumption here. We're assuming that the purpose or the goal of a firm is to maximize or make the most amount of profits as possible. That makes sense? Yes?
Yes,
All right.
sir.
So why do we react in this way? Why do we buy more when prices fall and less when prices rise?
because we could get more when the price falls.
Right? But why would we want more at lower prices?
Income has more buying power.
Do you remember
You could afford it.
what we talked about in consumer behavior?
Yes, sir.
What did we talk about in consumer behavior in relation to this? Because there's a direct correlation with consumer behavior with this good. What is the objective of a consumer? What do we
So to get satisfaction from the goods.
to get? Sorry,
Satisfaction from the goods.
how much
used,
satisfaction are we looking at?
the most they could get.
The most that we can get from the goods that we are purchasing at the prices that we're purchasing them. It's referred to as,
That's a utils thing.
there's a term we use for it. What's that?
Utils.
Utils, yeah. Utils is the unit of that we use to measure satisfaction. But when we're measuring satisfaction, what we're trying to do is we're trying to maximize our satisfaction.
The marginal utility.
Right. Because when the price falls, our marginal utility will be greater than the price. So therefore, we will demand more because remember again, we're trying to balance now the marginal utility of one good, let's say X, over the price that we pay for that good X. Remember that? We want that relationship to be equal to 1. You all remember that basic formula?
Yes, sir.
The utility of good X over the price of X is equal to 1. So that when the price falls, we will buy more because that means we would need to consume more units of the good X to be able to bring this equation back into equilibrium, to get the ratio back to 1. So let's say we were paying all right, so I do have a whiteboard up so we could look at it there to make it a little easier for you to see. I'm discarding those things. So well, I have this thing here. So if we have the right, so we have the marginal utility of good X over the price of good X is equal to 1. So it means that if the price of good X was $10, then the marginal utility that we should be getting from X should be 10 as well. But if the price falls to P is now $5, then for us to be able to balance this, we need to be consuming where the marginal utility is now going to be 5 to be able to get to 1. Now remember our marginal utility curve. This is the quantity of goods that we purchase, and this is the utils. You all remember this? Remember our marginal utility curve just falls like that. It's downward sloping. You remember that? So that
Yes.
right. So that for us to get to that lower level of utility, you remember we're going to have to come down and we're going to have to consume more. So this might be the point at which we were at 10 utils. All right. So therefore, at 10 utils, we were consuming this quantity of the goods. Let's say this was 5 units of the good, and therefore, when the price fell, we went out of equilibrium, so that we needed to get to where our utility was equal to 5. So that might be here. At this point here, this is 5, and therefore getting to 5 meant that we were somewhere here, maybe at 10 units. So we increased the amount of goods to bring ourselves back into equilibrium. Now you kind of see this what's happening when you go to the grocery and you're expected to pay a higher price for good, and if the good is normal, if you go there and the price is lower, then you're going to end up buying more of the good. All right, but it also means that if the price went up, remember the amount of utility, we would have to move up our scale here, and therefore we would reduce the amount of goods that we're buying. That makes sense?
Yep.
You follow that to extent?
Yes, sir.
All right.
So,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Hi. Mr. Brooks. Okay, I think you're having problems with your audio. I thought you were asking a question. All right. So I'm going back to this here. Current slide. So we understand why we behave the way we do, and we understand a little bit so far about why suppliers behave the way they do. Remember, as consumers, we are trying to maximize our satisfaction, whereas they are trying to maximize profits. That making sense? And their profits would be greater when prices rise, and it will fall when prices fall. So therefore, they will be encouraged to supply more when prices are high and less when prices are low. Again, everybody's following that, right? All right.
Yes, sir.
So this is the discussion that I did to think. And the point I was trying to make here is that the law of demand is an inverse or negative relationship. So that means that as one goes up, the other goes on. So as prices rise, the quantities demanded go down. Correct? That has to do with the relationship for demand. But the relationship for supply is a positive relationship. That's this one here. Because as prices rise, the quantities supplied rise with it. And the inverse is true, vice versa as well. So if prices fell, quantity demanded would go up. And if prices fell, the quantity supply would come down. So that's the situation that we're facing here. Making sense so far? All right. So far, so good. All right. So that then brings us. Yes. Somebody's asking a question. Okay. So that then brings us to the concept of schedules. So a schedule is simply just a listing of the individual's demand for the quantities that they would demand at different price levels. All right. And when we combine all the individuals that make up the market, we then create a demand schedule or market demand schedule. So we move from the individual to the market by combining all the individuals in the market to do it. And then from the demand schedule, we can derive a demand curve by graphing that schedule. Now, we've also shown that we can also use the indifference curves analysis. You all remember that?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
All right.
sir.
Indifference curves can also derive us a demand curve by looking at what you all remember what we looked at to get the indifference curves to give us a demand curve. You all remember that thing? I think I demonstrated in the last class. You all remember that? No?
We talking about the bundle of two goods? Like,
Yes.
I wasn't there, but I think I remember.
Well, you should have seen it there. All right. So let me clear this canvas, and we're gonna kind of scrap it out here again. Get this. All right. So we're gonna draw two axes. This time we're looking at on this. Remember, this is good X on the X-axis. I get that X looking better than that. And then we have good Y. All right. We have the indifference curves. But what we did, remember, we have budget lines, right? So we said that we changed the price of good X a number of times. So what will cause the price, what will cause a budget line to pivot from AB to AC to AD? You all remember that? For it to pivot outwards, it means that the price must have fallen 2 times. You remember that? So this one here is when we have prices going from P1 to P2 to P3. And in each case, what we're talking about, this might have been $20, this might have been $15, and this might be $10 here. So each one is, the prices are falling. Now I kind of drew this, anyway, I have a stitch for that. So remember, with indifference curves analysis, our indifference curves will say that when we move from one price level to another, it allows us to access higher levels of things. So we could go from IC1 to IC2 to IC3. Yeah, which means we are going to move to, from this point here, which is E, whoops. All right, so that's, so this is E1 to this point here, E2 to this point here. Let's just assume this is tangential, okay? We know that it's supposed to be tangential. E3, and if we connect these to each other, what do they create? You all remember what that was?
The line of the ECON consumption line.
Price consumption line. Very good. Curve. Let's call it a curve, right? And that shows the relationship between changes in price and the changes in quantity of X demanded, correct? So that means we are moving, therefore, from this position here of X1 to this position here of X2, and then to this position here of X3, okay? Now, that means we can use this information here to go below now to map out another relationship. But on this axis, we're going to put here, this is the quantities of good X. And on this side, we're going to be looking at the prices of good X. Right? So now, which is the highest price? P1, P2, or P3? You remember? Get up here. P1 is 20, P2 is 15.
P1.
So P1 would be the highest price up here. So we plot on this now. This is P1, which is 20. All right, so we could say this is 20 here. Then the next one was 15, so that's P2. All right, and the next one was 10, which is here. Call that $10. So that's P1. So that at P1, how much was demanded? That was this value here. So just for the sake of our argument, we're going to bring this line, a dotted line down, coming from P1, from X1. All right, so I'm bringing X1 down. I'm bringing this value down from here. You all remember this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So this is X1, X2, X3. So this is the amount, X1 was the amount that we purchased when we were at P1. So that gives us this position here. At X2, this is the amount we were purchasing when prices fell to 15. So that's this intersection there. And at P3, all right, so I actually have this reversed. This is supposed to be P3 here. This is supposed to be P1 up there, all right? So that at P3, that's the lowest price, we were here. So if we then connect these lines to each other, this gives us a what?
Individual demand curve.
There we go. This is the individual demand curve. And we actually label this common D like that. Let me draw it. Now just for your information, when you go into your textbooks, you're going to see demand curves labeled common D, that's individual demand. All right. Then you're going to see capital D, either two D's like that or just one capital D. That's market demand. And then when we go to macroeconomics, you're going to see this code AD, which is aggregate demand. That is adding the demand up for all goods and services in a country. So we add everything together. So that these notations are what you want to pay attention to when you're looking at graph. So this is how we used individual indifference curves analysis to derive an individual demand curve. But we also have the method here that we talked about, where we use, so we could go to this slide here. All right. So you realize that we've only taken from here two individuals out of the market. We have Tracy and we have Darren. So we have their individual demand schedules. So you have all these different prices here, 20, 30, and here we're looking at potatoes monthly. So notice again, we have two individual schedules for Tracy and Darren, columns 2 and 3. And for potatoes demanded per month over 5 prices in column 1. So we have 5 prices here. We add together all of the individual demand schedules for everyone in the market and derive the market demand schedule as seen in column 4. So how do we get to this column 4? What we did is we added Tracy at $20. We added Tracy plus Darren plus everybody else, and we got 700. Then at $40, we added Tracy's demand of 15 kilograms and 11 kilograms plus everybody else, and got 500. But this is tons, huh? So 500,000 tons of potatoes. So you're all understanding how this schedule is this market schedule is made up from the individual schedules. Yes? And then we then graph that information.
So you
Yes,
can
go ahead.
body parts that they get the total markets.
Okay, just say what you said again. You're breaking up, or you have a fan on you and it's causing a reduction on your audio.
Can you repeat how you get the total market demand?
So at every price, we added everybody's individual demand together. So we added Tracy plus Darren plus everybody else to give us this. So inside this $700 here would exist this amount for Darren and this amount for Tracy. That was added together here with everybody else in the market to give rise to that. So we're not adding down. What we're doing is we're adding across at each price level. So at price 20, this is the amount that everybody, Tracy and Darren plus everybody else, gives us 700,000 tons of potatoes per month. Okay. At $40, it'll be 15 plus 11 plus everybody else in the market will give us 500,000 tons. Then at price C, which is $60 or 60 pence, yeah, pence or cent, let's say 60 cents. Tracy will demand 5 kilograms per month. Darren is 9, so we add those together with everybody else in the market, and we get 350 tons, 1,000 tons of potatoes. So you realize that the law of demand is holding here, because as the prices are going up, every individual here is demanding less and less. That making sense? And the market demand that is being derived from everybody's demand is also falling as prices rise, because as we go down this line here, prices are going up, but the quantities being demanded is consistently falling, going down. Does that help you?
Yes, sir, thanks.
Okay, so now we're going to shift this information here, which really is going to be, we're going to take this information here and this information here to plot the market demand curve. So let me go here, you'd see. So if you remember, let's go back and look at the thing here. At $20, the total demand was 700, correct? So if we go here at $20, see it there? The total demand is 700. Seeing it? And if I remember carefully, at 100 pence, the total demand was 100. Seeing that there? So we're looking at these two values here. So all we did was simply take the information from the table and plotted it into a graph that then demonstrated or visualized the demand curve for the market. So that's what we were able to do. We took that information and we were able to look at the downward sloping. Again, it's downward sloping from left to right. All right. And that is in line with the law of demand. So it's showing us that as prices rise, the quantities demanded fall, and as prices fall, the quantities demanded rise. Seeing that? Yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So when we go here, well, that's exactly what I said here. You notice that demand curve is sloping from left to right, downward from left to right, right, reflecting the law of demand, which is what we were just talking. Thus, as prices fall, the quantities demanded rise, and as prices rise, the quantity demanded fall. The downward slope illustrates the negative or inverse relationship of the relationship between quantities demanded and price. All right. So that again is reflective of the law of demand. So now we come to one of the critical elements. What is causing us to move along these points? So the only thing that's allowing us or causing us to move along these points is because other things remaining equal, prices are changed. So a demand curve is constructed on the assumption that other things being equal, that's the term ceteris paribus, all right? In other words, it's assuming that none of the other determinants that might affect demand are changing. The only effect that we're looking at here is what happens when prices change. Therefore, when prices change, it causes us to move along the demand curve. So a movement along the demand curve, for example, the movement from B to D in the figure above, that's B here to D here, is caused when the prices of potato rise from $40 pence to 80 pence. So you see from 40 to 80, we move from B to D. All right. And that means at those positions, we move from 500,000 tons down to 200,000 tons of potatoes per month, sorry. Okay. Again, whenever we define demand and prices, is always going to be, and I think I have that somewhere here in the presentation. The quantity is usually always going to be defined in terms of a time period, and over here is going to be defined, prices are going to be determined or quoted in terms of a unit of something. So pounds of chicken, pounds of potato, or kilograms of potato, and so on. Okay. So the opposite is also true. If we move down, if prices were to fall, then we would move down the demand curve. All right. So another phrase that we use to express that is we call them contractions and extensions. So a contraction would be from B to D, whereas an extension would mean from B to A. Now, you have to listen to the phrases that we're using here now. So when prices rise from 40 to 80, we move from B to D along the price curve. We can say that there was a contraction in quantities demanded. Why contraction? Because contraction means to get smaller. All right. So we can demand contracted, or the quantities demanded, and it's important for you to remember this phrase here, the quantities demanded contracted from B to D. If, however, we have prices fell from 40 to 20, and we move from B to A, which is from this point here, B to point A here, we can say that there was an extension in quantities demanded from 500 to 700. So we're seeing that there. At B, we had 500, that's 40 pence. And at A, we are 20 pence, and we move up to, or there was a extension in quantities demanded from 500 to 700. So we understanding that distinction. The only thing that is causing the quantities demanded, sorry, to change is change in price. Now we refer to that as the price determinant of demand. So The only thing that causes us to change the quantities demanded is if there are changes in price. Okay? And that phrase that we use is always going to be described as there's a change in quantities demanded. So the only thing that will cause changes in the quantities demanded is a change in price. And that's the thing that we have to pay attention to. That's why I made the statement, pay attention to that distinction. So the next thing we looked at is what happens if we hold price constant and change other things. And those other things are called non-price determinants. All right, so we have the phrase down here. We call them non-price determinants. And using the distinction that that guy, Mr. Clifford identified, we brought them down to 5 basic areas here. These are things that will cause demand to change. Now, notice I'm not saying quantities demanded, I'm saying demand will change. When there's a change in taste and fashion, when there's a change in the number and price of substitute goods or complementary goods, when there's a change in the level of income and its distribution in the economy, when there's a change in expectations about the future, and when there's changes in government policy. So the question is, do we understand what each one of these things means? So let's talk about fashion and taste. What can you think of anything that would change our current tastes and fashion, or can you give me an example of that? No?
Sorry, repeat the question.
Can you give me an example of what happens when fashion changes? How does this work? So if we go to the diagram here, forget the words up here for now. What we're seeing here is that the demand curve, when there's a change in a non-price determinant, the demand curve picks up and shifts to the left or to the right, depending upon the impact of that. So let's track one change here. Let's say something has happened and fashion trends have changed. What fashions have recently changed?
Seasonal. If we use a new US, winter and spring, them kind of stuff you're talking about?
Well, things like that, but we also have our own fashion changes that take place in front of that, don't we? What is one of the times when fashion kind of becomes kind of critical?
So carnival,
Sorry?
around carnival time.
Right. Especially when we go in to fetes. Especially with women. Men tend to go with t-shirt and jeans and stuff like that, correct? But for women, there's usually been some change or style that becomes more predominant during that period, or popular. That's the word we're talking about. So, right. So, given that we may have a carnival, what was the fashion changes or the fashionable thing for women to wear at parties for last carnival? For those of you who were there into that in that
Cut up pants. Them cut up and them distressed pants.
distressed jeans, very good.
So a lot of monokinis and short pants.
Right. Well, let's stay focused on the distressed jeans. All right. That's the term that was used. That's used to describe that particular fashion. It's called distressed jeans or distressed because they also did it in various types: shorts, jean shorts, long jeans, and that kind of stuff. So you'd have all these people again going there, and it was sliced and cut up and stressed out and that kind of stuff. Now that happens naturally. Yeah? If any of you all have old jeans, after a while, at the knees and at the especially at the knees and stuff, where it creases a lot, it will tend to start to get threadbare and then pop open, right? You're familiar with that, correct? But of course, they were selling them pre-distressed, right? Now, those type of jeans have always existed in the market. But during last carnival, what would have happened as a result of the the increase in popularity, the change in fashion trends, was that at all prices, the demand would have moved from D0 to D1. That means the demand curve would have shifted to the right, meaning that the demand for that type of jeans would have increased at all prices. Now, what does that mean? Look at the phrase here, at all prices. What does it mean when we say it's at all prices? So at all prices means that in the market, there are different versions of the same type of jeans that sell at different prices. So you might have some jeans that are selling for $400 for one, same distressed jeans. You might have those that are $300 or in between. Then you might have those that are $200. Then you might have a set that is $100. And then what was the cheapest you could have buy it for? Maybe about $60. Would you say that? So it means that at before we would have had demand looking like this at the original price. All right. Now we're not putting a supply curve here just yet, but we're just simply looking at what's going to happen. So now that it became fashionable, what you found happening is that more people would want to purchase those types of distressed jeans, so the demand curve would pick up and go across here. So therefore, the $400 jeans will start to experience an increase in demand as a result of it becoming more fashionable. So the demand curve will slip across like that. Now they did one here thing. So let me move this over to the whiteboard so we could kind of map it out again. Clear canvas. All right. So again, we start with our demand. We're going to plot out the demand curve now. So along this axis, we measure quantities of the distressed jeans. I'll call them DJs. Okay. Well, this G's. And on this side, we have prices. Would you agree that prices per pair, correct? So would you agree that there are some of those jeans that went for as high as $400 for one? Let's call this 300 here. I'm just using the scales one time. 200, 100, 50, and 25. So if this was our demand curve D1, this is the original demand before it became fashionable. When the distressed jeans became more fashionable, what you find happening is that the demand curve shifted to the right, meaning that the quantities demanded at all prices rose. So if we come across in this direction here, you realize that it would have gone from, let's say, again, this is 0 here. So let's say this is for the whole market, right? Because it's capital D's. We'd say this is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. Who's this?
Hi, Sylvia, Akiva. So I sent a message just now, but you ain't see it as yet. So right now I'm not feeling too good, so I want to know if I could leave.
Of course you can. You can.
And I just want to know how soon the recording will be up on eClassroom.
Well, depending on how long it is, it takes a little while to process in the Google, and then once it's processed, I'll load it up. Okay. So I'll see if I could try and load it up either tomorrow, tonight, or tomorrow morning.
Okay, sir.
Okay, I'll try and hang out tonight and see what's happening. So, look after yourself, please. Okay. So this is distressed jeans by the thousands. Okay. By the thousands demanded per week. All right. So that people would buy less of the $400 jeans and more of the cheaper jeans, which are maybe at the the lowest price is probably about $60 or $75 for one, right? But what you would notice is that because of the switch in the fact that it became more trendy, the demand curve just shifted over to the right, meaning that at all prices the demand increased. Now, what caused the increase in demand? The fact that it was now more fashionable to buy that. Making sense? All right.
Fashionable.
Because everybody wants to look good when they go to a party.
Yes, sir.
So therefore, that they would go out there, and if they are accustomed spending $200 for a pair of jeans or $100 for a pair of jeans, and I would understand why they would be $75 jeans as well, because you might want to buy a number of them to go to different fetes, that kind of stuff, and then you'll take one and probably use it for Juve, because when you're finished with Juve, it's done, and right? Because the most you could probably do with that is clean clean car and thing. I don't know if we want to put that kind of material on your car, but you all understand this concept now of how a non-price determinant. Huh?
You know the things there.
Say that again. I think that's Mr. Brooks. You're making your comments and disappearing. I know the
Nah,
thing.
say, you know the thing.
Okay. All right. So we understand what this is happening. Now, what happened after Carnival with this market for the distressed jeans?
Price reduced.
Prices didn't reduce,
Decrease.
no.
Demand decline.
The
The demand for it
probably
reduced.
went back to its original position prior to that it was prior to Carnival. So it slipped back down to D1. You follow me? Because this jump from D1 to D2, so D1 to D2, when we shifted, was caused by the fashion sense during Carnival. All right. When Carnival was over, what happened was, so this is post Carnival now. All right. In the post Carnival situation, you had to go from D2 back down to D1. That was a leftward shift there in this direction. That makes sense? That sounds logical to you guys?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I understand.
All right. So let's look at the
Yes, sir.
other
Yes, sir.
non-price determinants that he identified. He talked about hair. So taste and fashion are very similar, right? So you could grasp that one. What do you think he means by changes in the number and prices? I'm sorry, the number and price of substitute goods and complementary goods. Well, there's a lot to unpack in that statement. Huh? So let's look at a simpler one for now. Changes in the level of income and its distribution. There are two elements there. Changes in income means if your income goes up, what's supposed to happen?
You buy
Correct.
more.
For normal goods,
Buy
you'll
a-
buy more
yeah.
of everything, correct? Right. So
Yes, sir.
what we're talking about there now is that there was a increase in demand at all prices brought on by an increase in people's salaries or incomes, correct? So far, so good? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yes, sir.
But what does distribution mean?
The availability of the product.
Uh-huh. No. Distribution of income.
Oh, sorry. The budget constraint. So how you
No. All right. So we're talking about two changes that can happen. There can be a change in the levels of people's income, which could go up or down, or its distribution in the economy. So what would cause a change in the distribution of income in a country?
Less resources.
Sorry?
Less resources to make the
No, no,
product.
no. Guys, not connecting here, you know. When we say
So,
uh-huh.
so taxes that the workers pay.
Correct. So if there's a change in the type of taxes that govern an economy, it can change the distribution of income in the economy. So recently, the government did what? In terms of distribution of income, what was the personal income level changed to? So it's
7,000.
anybody earning $7,000 or less per month, right? Now has now is exempt from paying any taxes. That makes sense? So all of the individuals there would have received an increase in their income based upon a change in the tax bracket. So we have the tax bracket 0%, 25%, and we have a 35%
Oh,
tax bracket. So zero is from $0 to $7,000 per month. All right. The 25% tax bracket is from $7,001 to $1,000,000 per month. All right. And anybody who's earning above $1,000,000 will pay 35%. You follow me?
Yes, sir.
All right. So
yes, sir.
that means that level of taxation there means that the government can then take some of the money it is getting in the form of taxes from higher income people and redistribute it through various social programs, all right, to lower income households so that they can get some income to spend. That's through social welfare. They pay grants like old age pension and stuff like that. Those type, well, we don't call it old age pension. What's the term we use for it now?
Retirement benefit.
Sorry?
Retirement benefits.
No. We call it senior citizens grants. I think it's called the PC term for it. What we call
Oh, yeah.
pensions, right? And you have pensions that people get just because they got a certain age level, and they're individuals who worked and earn a pension as well. So you have NIS, if you made NIS contributions and stuff like that. That's how it works. But there's some people who don't. They've never worked a day in their life, but they are now eligible to receive the old age pension as a social payment or social transfer. That money actually comes from the taxation that takes place here. So this first bracket here eliminated a group of individuals from society from the tax burden. But from time you start to earn more than $7,000 a month, you are eligible to pay 25% tax on that increase or that amount that is exceeding this here. And of course, if you earn yearly more than $1,000,000, you pay a higher rate of taxes as well. So making sense? So that's how changes in income levels can happen, not only by simply people getting more income. So that means increased wages and salaries. But you can also have a change in the way in which income is distributed. And when it moves from people who earn higher levels of salary to people who earn lower levels of salary, then you have a change in spending patterns and spending behavior. And that will cause the demand curve to shift to the left or to the right, depending upon the direction of the change. What about expectations of future changes in the thing? How does that affect your demand for something now? So one of the things that we talk about here is if you expect that the future prices of something is to go up, then what do you do now? What would you do now?
You'll buy more now.
I more now. But what happens, like, especially when the government says from January 1st, taxes on such and such an item will be removed. What would you do?
Hold off on buying.
So you delay
Buy
purchasing
less now.
now. For right now, your demand will shift to the demand curve will shift to the left in this way. You follow? From D1 down to D0. Making sense? Because you expect that for now, your demand is going to go back. But when the change takes place, your demand will probably go forward back in the other direction in this sense when the change comes in. Other expectations that can impact upon your demand right now would be the expectation of a new model of something coming out or an improved edition of it. So that actually happens in the market for iPhones and for um, for cell phones. What you find happening, and this is what kind of explains things in that takes place in that market. Let me explain that in the whiteboard again. So what happens in that market is you have a situation where let me just get a new canvas and done. All right, so we are talking about expectations of changes in the future. So we were saying that in the market for, let's call them smartphones, all right. So this is the quantity of smartphones that you would purchase per, let's say, per year, as opposed to price per unit. All right. So what happens to the new models? So you have two markets. You have the new model market and the older versions. So in the market for the older versions, what will happen to that if you expect a new version to be coming out? Right. So you might
Decrease.
find that if this was the original demand curve here, D1, for the smartphones, not the new ones, let's get rid of this, you'd find that because there's an expectation in the next month that a newer version of the smartphone is going to come out, the demand curve will shift to the left, meaning that you will cut back on your demand in anticipation of that new smartphone coming out in the future. So you're going to delay buying it, and it's going to cause the demand at all price levels to fall. Not because prices changed, but because what? Because of the expectation of a newer version coming out. So that's how expectations work in impacting upon impacting upon demand. That makes sense? You're
Yes, sir.
following that, right? Yeah. Okay. Can you think?
Yes,
Can you
sir.
think of any other circumstances where expectations might be something you want to look at? Can any other good that is affected by expectations?
So
In what way?
sneakers.
No, you just can't say sneakers. You have to say, you have to explain it. You have to give us a
If, like if the new Jordans come out, the one before that's ridiculous.
true. So it's the same thing like that. Yeah. But can you think of anything besides that example of expectation of a newer version coming out? Are there any other forms of expectations that can affect um, your willingness to buy something now and put it off for later, or expectations of something happening in the future that will make you want to buy more of the item now?
Storm. If you're having a storm, you might up to buy more canned foods. No, I don't
Right.
know. Trying something.
Yeah, no, that will work. If there's the expectation of a storm in the near future, what you find, and you see that happening, you see people running in there, and one of the first things they pick up is what? Bottled water. What
Toilet paper.
else? No, that was for the pandemic. tin food,
Yeah, to buy batteries, to buy batteries
tin
as well.
food, batteries,
Yeah.
right? So, what are some of the other things you buy when there's an expectation of storm? And again, it's expectations. Huh? We are told that there's a storm coming, so it develops expectations, and therefore we go out and we buy a list of things. Tin foods, we buy, knows one we always buy in? Or tell me if you agree with that. If you can make it
Right.
out. It's as buy cricks. You don't buy cricks?
Well, it is a vital supply.
Yes, sir. It's
Yeah. That's something that's totally um local, huh? Just letting you know. Huh? That's a local Palance thing there with that. So you buy your cricks or your salt biscuit and that kind of stuff and you're good to go. Your sardine and your tuna and whatnot. But one of the big things we start stocking up on as well is water, because if there's flooding, we know that there's a likelihood, especially in some areas, that the water that drinking water can become contaminated. That makes sense? All right.
And in some areas, sandbags.
Say again? Sandbags. Yes, that's true. Um, I've noticed that there's actually a improvement in technology where they are using sandbags that fill with water rather than sand, because you could apparently do more. All right, so changes in government policy. I think that one's fairly straightforward. Once government starts to change policy, it impacts upon demand at all prices. But let's look at this one here: changes in the number and prices of substitutes and complements, because that one kind of comes up a lot, and I want you all to understand it a bit better. So the first thing we want to look at is, what is a complement? Let's deal with complementary goods. Doctor, can somebody define what is a complementary good?
Something a good that could be that could be paired with another good to get maximum satisfaction. And
Give me an example. Let's see if you're getting that right in your mind.
um, milk and cereal. I don't milk and
That's
cornflakes.
something like Clifford. That's something like Clifford. But he don't know the training experience. You never had cereal with water.
No, I have not.
You'd never do that? Look.
Nope.
Or
So what
dry
kind of
cereal.
madness is that?
Huh?
I
That's
say,
a,
what kind of madness is that?
hello, I know madness. When you're poor and you ask. Only living in the lap of luxury. Look, throw some water in there, get a little wet on you.
But so is that correct though? The
No,
cereal
it's
and
not.
milk
It's
thing?
not. It's not.
Okay, well I'm not sure, but I
Right.
think
Let me give you a little bit of a definition. A complementary. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Gas and cars.
Gas and cars. Yes,
I like
that's an
moving and
excellent one. Oh,
performance.
and we could broaden it. It's vehicles and fuel. That makes sense. But let's
Yes, yes.
define it a little bit. That makes sense. So it's one good. All right. That is required, or that doesn't, that requires, I'll straighten it, UIR, requires another for
So
consumption.
basically hand in hand.
Hmm?
So it basically goes hand in hand. Say
Yes,
that
they
out.
go hand in hand. Okay, can't seem to write here because of that symbol nonsense there. All right, so it's one good that requires it's one good that requires another for it to be able to consume. So without it, you can't use it. That makes sense? So that's why the example of vehicles and some form of fuel. Now, somebody might start to say, Well, what about cars that use batteries? Well, batteries or electric cars are still using a form of fuel or energy. All right, so we could say that they still need some form of energy. All right, it's just the source of the energy that you're looking at there. Okay, but for our argument, complementary goods is one good that requires another for you to use it or for its consumption. So there are some goods that you have that you must have something else for it to work. So if you buy a printer, then it must have ink and paper. Yeah, that making sense,
Yes, sir.
right? Um, well, we used to say if you buy a DVD player, you had to have DVDs, correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Or in the our case, you might say a Blu-ray player. You must have Blu-rays to go with it, or else what's the point of buying it? In that sense. Now, what we want to look at is how does this impact upon each other? So now we kind of understand what we're talking about with a complementary good. Complementary goods have to be consumed. So let's choose the cars and the gas, right? So we have two markets that we're looking at. This is the market here for cars. All right. So this is the quantity that's being purchased, and this is the prices. I'm not gonna scale it. All right. Just going to do representational type of thing. And on this side, we're looking at the fuel market. All right. So quantity of fuel. Okay. In dollars here and whatnot. So let's say that in the car market, what we found happening is that prices rose. So if this is our demand curve here for cars, so let's say that's D1 in the market for cars, and the price of cars went up. So prices were initially here at P1. So therefore we had this value here. Let's call that Q1, 2, 3. Let's call that Q4 being purchased. But prices went up to P2 here. What happens in the market for cars? We move from this point here, this point A, to this point B. So what is this here? This is a movement along the curve like that, called a what? What would this be called?
A contraction.
Very good. So we'd have an increase in price causing a contraction in quantities QTYS demanded. So what happens in the market for the complementary good? So we go into this market and we go back here and say this is D1 in this market here. What happens in this market for fuel? You have a reduction in the quantities of cars being purchased. So what will happen to fuels? Price of fuel didn't change. Say again.
Sorry, not you.
All right. So what will happen is that the demand for all types of fuels will fall because the general prices of vehicles went up. Making sense? You see that relationship there? That if the price of cars went up, it will lead to a fall in the a decrease of a fall in the quantities demanded of cars, leading to a decrease or fall in demand for fuel at all prices. That makes sense? So let's map that relationship out. So we have here, we have the price of cars went up. Yes? And the quantities demanded of fuel went down. That makes sense? You all see that relationship? How would you describe this relationship here? Anybody? Does that make sense? It's an inverse or negative relationship because you have the price of one good going up and the quantities demanded of the other going down. So that's an inverse or negative relationship. You seeing that? That's between complements, two complementary goods.
Oh, yeah.
You seeing it? It's
Yes, sir.
inverse. Now the opposite is also true. If, and I'm going to use green here now, if the price of cars went down from P2 to P1, we will actually have a movement from B to A down this way, meaning that the quantities of cars being demanded will go from Q2 to Q4. Making sense? And what would happen is that the demand for fuel, if we go back to the original position here, P1, it wouldn't move to the left. It will actually shift somewhere out here to D2 to the right. That makes sense? Yep, that makes sense. But
Yes, sir.
it's still giving us a negative relationship because in this case, the green case here now, we still have the price of cars going down, leading to the quantities demanded for fuel going up at all prices. That as seen through this shift in this demand curve here. You seeing that? So this is why they say that the change in price of a related good, in this case here, we're looking at the first one, complementary goods. When there's a change in the price of a complement, it causes the quantities demanded to shift in this market here. That makes sense? All right, so it causes, that's why this is considered a non-price determinant of demand. So far, so good? All right, so this will be on the recording, so I'm going to erase this. Any questions on this so far? I want to look at the substitutes in a little bit. Any questions?
No, sir.
Everybody's following this diagram a little bit?
Yes, sir.
Cool. All right, so let's clear the canvas, and now we're going to start looking at so we're going to go back now. We're going to start looking at substitutes. What are substitutes? Anybody?
Something similar to a particular good, probably less quality, less.
Well, we wouldn't want to compare it like that.
Cheaper.
Well, that's all right. Just now. So check this out. See if this makes sense. One good that replaces another one in terms of its use, and it must do so completely, in the sense that it can't only partially replace the other good. It has to wholly replace the functions of the other good. That makes sense?
Yes, sir.
All right. So can anybody give me examples of substitute goods that you might think of?
So frozen goods versus fresh chicken. Fresh chicken versus frozen chicken.
Okay, so maybe yes, that could be one. Fresh versus frozen. And we could broaden that to not only chicken, we could say meats. All right. Anybody else?
Sir,
Sorry?
for the substitute goods, you mean like two different goods that is used for the same purpose?
Well, it's one good that replaces another. That makes sense?
Still replaces, you could still use it, but so when you say replaces, you could still use it, but you choose one. You choose the one that you.
Yeah, you choose one or the other. All right, so I'll give you a classic one.
So what about
So like tea and coffee?
Say again,
They have a
sorry.
lot of substitutes.
rice and potato? Something like that. I don't know.
So like
Well,
tea,
some
coffee.
people might
It's
consider
like
again.
shampoo.
Okay, Mr. Brooks, shampoo.
So I remember from the video they had said between the like a comparison between cow's milk and like almond milk.
Good. That's a better one. Cow's milk and almond milk. They're supposedly both milk, but one is from the animal, as opposed to the other one is from almonds. Trust me, have any of you ever drunk almond milk?
Yes, sir.
I find it tastes disgusting.
No.
I'm actually allergic to it, so it's absolutely horrible. And I'll give you another one that's not so popular here in Trinidad, and that is butter and margarine.
Yes, sir. Like toothpaste, like Colgate and Crest.
No, that's two brands. They're both the same good.
Oh, okay.
We're not talking about different brands. We're talking about different,
Oh, not
Different.
totally
different
different.
brand.
Sorry.
So
Same brands. Are
Oh, it's right.
Okay, Mr. Brooks, I wasn't hearing you properly. Could you
No,
repeat your question?
I was with the same toothpaste thing, but now you're saying it's a different brand, so it's same good. I thought it was like different now.
Yeah, me too.
They are different in terms of branding, but they are the same product. So they're not substitutes for each other. What you're talking about is substituting brands. Um, but what we're talking about is two different types of goods. One good that replaces another good in terms of its use. All right. So butter and margarine is probably one of the most classic forms of um, substitution. And in Trinidad, we actually don't quite get this distinction between margarine and butter, except when you
How
go
come
to
it,
pay
how
for it.
come
Uh-huh.
what's the difference between them?
Margarine is a synthetic form of butter.
Yeah, so margarine is made of like oils and water, and butter is made from milk.
Well, it's actually margarine is made from vegetable extracts, which is oils from vegetables and plants, and butter is made from the buttermilk that is extracted from cows. So this comes from is an animal source, right? And this is a plant source. And which one do you think is better for you?
Plant.
Plant.
And that's where you'll all be wrong.
Yeah, the plants.
Nope.
animal.
Animal is better for us. Why?
Even I
Because
find cow milk better with it, fresher. Don't have as much oils and fats and stuff.
well, in fact, the reason why butter is better than margarine. Remember, the reason why butter is very expensive because we have a shortage of cows in the world. We don't have as much cows as the demand for milk. And that's where margarine came up. And what happened in the early days when margarine was being advertised, it was said that, or they advertised that it was healthier than butter because butter had all of these fats in it, this animal fat protein and stuff like that. And then people started to develop allergies to some of the rennin proteins in it and whatnot. That's when you're lactose intolerant. All right. The problem with margarine, though, because it's plant-based, our digestive system cannot digest plants. That's why cows is the intermediary between plants and us, and from its milk in particular, and the products that we make from milk, which would include butter and cheese. So Margarines, however, come from plant oils and what is referred to as edible oils extracted from plants. And what you have a problem with is that our body cannot digest it properly, which therefore gives us a problem where we start to get all these dangerous cholesterols and triglycerides in it. So butter is actually much easier for your body to absorb and to use all aspects of it. And it's been found, well, not found, but it's been proven that the fat from animals is actually better for you than fat coming from trees or plant oils, because your body can process it. It can't process the margarine oils because we're not efficient at it, because we don't have the number of stomachs it takes to do it. That's why cows have 5 stomachs. Huh? You all know that, right? Okay, so coming back to margarine. Now, in this country, we have a problem. When you go to buy butter, what you just go and buy?
A long time ago.
Blue Band. But you know what Blue Band is?
No,
Blue
butter.
Band is margarine. It's
Oh.
not butter.
That is correct.
So,
All right. So when your mother sends you to buy butter and you come back with next time you go and she sends you for butter and you come back home with Kerrygold, which is butter, and she started beat you because you weigh some money.
but when my mother asked me to go and buy butter, when I buy it, and she accepted.
Me no.
Because in Trinidad we have gotten accustomed to looking at Blue Band as butter, but Blue Band is not butter. All right. In fact, there's a whole product called I Can't Believe It's Not Butter. Do you know that product?
Yes,
Yes,
and
sir.
I can't believe it's not butter, is because it's not butter, it's margarine. All right, so let's look at how this works. All right. So we understand that here we're looking at one good that substitutes for another. Another one we can look at here in Trinidad might be um, this thing. Foreign use tires and brand new tires. You seeing that? That is a situation that might apply for Trinidad. That makes sense? Because one is a substitute for another. All right, so let's look at the butter.
But they both tires.
They're both tires, but their sources are different. They're treated as different products. One is a used product and one is a new product. It's the same thing with roll-on, roll-off cars and brand new cars. They're substitutes for each other. They can't, you see, remember, it's one good that replaces another one in terms of its use. So a roll-on, roll-off car or a used or pre-owned vehicle is not considered to be the same as a new vehicle. Making sense? Anyway, let's come back to Marguerite here. All right, so we're going to start first off by mapping out the two markets. So this here, let's say this is the market for butter. All right, and over here we have the market for margarine. All right, so again, we're making the assumption, whoops, not that. We're making the assumption that they're both normal goods, because from the time we draw this curve here, we are making the assumption that they're both normal goods. Price and quantities here. This would be quantities and prices here. And again, we have, this is demand here. All right, so this is D1. So let's look and see what happens here. Let's say in the market for butter, this is the initial price P2. So at P2, this is the quantities here, Q1, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is Q4 here. So at P2, Q4 is the amount that's being purchased. And if, let's say, prices for butter goes up from P2 to P4 up here, then what happens is the demand falls down to Q4, Q3, Q2, down to Q2 here. So we have this movement here. What we have therefore is this movement from point A to point B, which is a what, guys? What is this going to be called?
Contraction.
Right, so we have a contraction in the quantities demanded, all right, for butter. That's this one here. All right. Now, what happens when the price of one good goes up? What happens in the market for its substitute? So those are people who would have gone from Q4 to Q2. It meant that some people left this market and went across to this market to go to the substitute. Make sense? And in that market, therefore, you'd find that as butter has become more expensive, people would substitute into their diet margarine so that the demand curve will shift over to the right to D2. Making sense? That makes sense, guys?
Yes, sir.
All right. Just want to clear this up here a little bit. Okay. This cube here. All right. Let's map out that relationship. We have prices of butter going up, and what happens to the quantities demanded of margarine? It went up too. See that? So this is a positive relationship.
On the diagram, say for butter,
Uh-huh.
not supposed to be P1 first and then P2. We go up to P2.
Yeah, this is P4 here actually, not P2.
Oh,
So this is
okay.
P2. All right. I still come into grips with this right and pad thing here. It's kind of slippery. Okay. So let's reverse the situation and start to look at in terms of if, let's say instead we're going back to P2 and say instead prices of butter went down from P2 to P1. So prices will go down like that. So at P1 now, quantities demanded went to Q5, correct? That makes sense? So we move from A to this point here, C, on the demand curve. This is a what? This is an
extension.
An extension in the quantities QTYS demanded. All right, and what that extension was caused by a fall in the price of butter. So what happens to now we're going back to D1, that's the original position. What would happen in the market now for margarine as a result of the fall in the price of butter? People who prefer butter but couldn't afford it at P2 will leave the market for margarine and come across to the market for butter. So what will happen is that we will show that by the demand curve shifting to the left now to D0. That makes sense? Everybody follows that one?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So notice again, in the green situation, we have the price of butter is going down, leading to the quantities demanded for margarine also going down. So it means that we still have the same positive relationship because as one moves in one direction, the other one also moves in that direction. So this is a positive, or what is also called a direct relationship. That makes sense? And I hope everybody can understand
Yes,
this.
sir.
All right. So far, so good. All right. So let's go back to the presentation and pick up where we are. So we understand how these things impact upon the impact upon the market. So that when these things change, it causes the curves to shift to the left or to the right, depending upon the impact of that. So this is where we see whenever there's a change in a non-price determinant, it could shift the curve to the left. This is an increase here when we move from to the left, sorry, to the right, sorry. So the increase in demand is shown by a shift to the right. So the one move to the right, all right, and a decrease will be when we go to the left. Okay, so I think that's in the next slide here. This is the decrease here when we shift to the left. Making sense? And I put this example. For example, look at the demand for cinema tickets today given the COVID-19 situation. As a result of that, in fact, we've gone off the market because we can't go and see cinema shows because they're off limits, right? Due to what? Non-price determinant, government policy. See that there? So that shift is caused by a government policy change. Making sense? All right. So
Yes, sir.
we must remember the difference between the two. We have to be able to understand that when we change prices or the price determinant, it leads to changes in the quantities demanded, illustrated by extensions and contractions. We have to do that because when we have non-price determinants changing, it causes change in demand illustrated by shifts to the left or to the right. That's why all these words are put out there. And the reason why you need to pay attention to this is because you must understand what's happening in the market and how we illustrate it. We have to distinguish them. You're going to get a lot of questions in your midterm effort. In the quiz for this, that's going to ask you to do this distinction. So for anybody who's attempted the quiz already, you're going to find this this circumstance coming up a lot. All right, so make sure you understand this. And the nice thing about this is once you understand it, for demand, supply is the same thing, except it goes in the opposite. So when we go to supply, remember we have a supply curve. Again, the same thing. Supply, this is one farmer, and we add all farmers together to get the market supply curve, which we then plot into the same diagram here. And that gives us the supply for this entire market of potatoes from all the farmers at different price levels. Okay, so then once we have that information for each individual, we then can derive the supply curve for everybody. Then you'd notice that this supply curve is upward sloping from left to right. You seeing that? And that therefore shows us that there's a positive relationship between the quantity supplied and the quantities of price, which reflects the supply curve, the law of supply. Remember that? The law of supply states that as prices rise, quantity supplied increase, and as prices fall, quantity supplied decrease. So this is where you can see, if you come across here where prices go from 100 down to 40, we'd see supply, and we call that what? What would we call a movement from here to here in the supply curve? Anybody?
I don't see where you do. Sorry.
So if we move from point E here to point B here, this point to this point here, caused by a fall in the price from 100 to 40, what would we call the movement along these 2 points here, from here to here?
Extraction.
Following from, very good. This will be a contraction. A contraction in what?
You supplied quantity supply.
No, we have to use the correct phrase. The quantities supplied. And the reason why I'm pointing out this phrase here, this phrase is important because it cues you in to whether or not we're talking about a change in price or a change in a non-price determinant. Okay, and I think we discussed that here. A movement along the curve. See it there? So the same thing we're talking about here. From B, if prices go up from B to D, what is this one called? If we go from B to D along this arrow here.
Extraction.
Correct. An extension in quantities supplied. And I think that's what we talk about here. A movement along the supply curve will caused by that. All right. The opposite here from D to B, same thing. And of course, we add the terminologies, extensions in quantity supplied or contractions in quantity supplied. That makes sense? So you have the situation from C to E is an extension in quantity supplied brought on by an increase in price. So prices went up from 60 to 100 here. And then from C down to A is a contraction in quantity supplied caused by a change in price. So again, the main thing that we have to take note here, movements along the curve are caused by changes in the price of the good. So demand doesn't change. Demand stays the same, but what has changed is the quantities demanded on this demand schedule or this supply schedule is changing. All right. So these are the non-price determinants of supply. Changes in the cost of production. That actually has to do with the factor inputs or factor cost. You all know about that one, right? Factors of production. If the cost goes up, then what will happen? If factor costs rise, what do you think would happen?
Supply what?
Supply would do what? If this was our original supply curve here, all right, that's, whoops, my bad. Supply curves are not drawn like this. Somebody needs to be buffing me. Hold on.
Next way, sir. Next way.
Yes, I know. Yeah. Can I? Well, I mean, if I had known, why did I draw it that way?
When you say factor cost, what you mean, sir?
What is the cost of the factors of production?
Okay, good, good. All right.
Right. So remember, if you are working, you're part of the labor force or factor of production labor, correct?
Prices will rise?
No, no, no. All right. So what we're looking at here primarily is basically what is the impact of when these change. All right. Let me see if I could copy that over to the.
So unfortunately, I have to be excused at the moment.
You're going to be excused.
Oh, sorry. Can I be excused?
Of course you can. I can't prevent you from leaving. All right. Okay.
I understand that.
You don't understand what? I
said
can't.
I wouldn't miss that much.
No, you shouldn't. You shouldn't really.
Good night.
All right. Good night. Okay. So I don't know. Maybe I can paste this in here. All right. So the point I was trying to make was this: that when you have a supply curve and the costs, the factor costs increase. So this is your supply curve. Let's call that S1. Okay. If the factors of production now cost more, then the firms in the market will probably only be able to produce less. So what you're going to have happening is that the supply curve is going to shift to the left from S to S0. If factors of production become cheaper, then you would shift to the right like this. So you'd move to S2. That makes sense? That's with factors of production. But he's following that now, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. What about changes in the number of firms? Changes in the number of firms really speaks to the situation where you would have more firms coming into the market. So if more firms come into the market, what's going to happen is we will shift to the right, because supply will increase at all prices because now there are more firms in the market. But if a lot of firms leave the market, then we'll shift to the left. All right, and therefore the supply would then fall because all of the firms left the market. That makes sense, guys? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So changes in the aims of producers that will can affect your supply curve. Same way if suppliers want to cut costs or if they want to increase output, those are the aims and goals. Again, we see changes in government policy can also impact upon that. Just like it did in demand, government policy can impact upon the behavior of firms in terms of their willingness, ability, and the cost of them being able to deal with those things. So we like with the cinema situation, no cinemas are available to operate during this time frame because of government policy. All right. Same thing with expectation of future price changes. So again, a firm might expect that in the future prices are going to rise, so then that will increase their supply. But if they expect prices to fall in the future, then they will start to cut back their supply and supply will shift. And then of course we have nature and random shocks and other unpredictable events can have that type of impact as well in supply. So like for example with COVID, that is considered a random shock. It's not every day that we have pandemics happening, but in some markets it has led to the supply of things falling. So you have the supply curve. This is the original position here, shifting to the left to S0 because of the negative impact. But for other companies, the supply curve would have shifted to the right. Consider the manufacturers of Zoom, that meeting software. They were able to increase their output and sales because of the change in the environment. So based upon the nature of the shock, it can impact upon different types of firms differently. Now, when we have changes in the non-price determinant, the main thing that we have to pay attention to is the fact that the curves are going to shift to the right or to the left depending upon the impact of that. So again, though, we talk to that as an increase or decrease in supply, not increase and decrease in quantity supplied. Quantity supply, we simply stay on the same supply curve and we move up and down the supply curve. But if we say increase or decrease in supply, we're talking about the supply curve shifting back and forth. Making sense so far? So that's what we talked about here. So again, it's important for you to remember to get the distinction between what causes changes in quantity supplied, which is caused by change in price, which is the price determinant, and the difference, the impact for a change in non-price determinant causing changes in supply, which is the entire supply curve shifting to the left or to the right. So pay attention to that. Those are critical because when we start to look at equilibrium, we have to look at it together there. All right, so equilibrium is a situation that we're going to be looking at now, where equilibrium positions in the market determine prices and output levels. All right, so the equilibrium price determines the price and the equilibrium quantity. So in the market, you have this demand function here, or demand schedule, and you have this supply schedule. And you'll notice that at this point here, at point CC, which capital C common C, which is at 60 pence, this market seems to be in equilibrium because the two forces in the market seem to be canceling each other out. Okay, so that at this level here, the market is said to be in equilibrium. Now, graphically, when we're looking at that, you'd see that at that place here, there's no excess or wastage in the market. Everything that is brought to the market, that's here, is what is bought up in the market. So the market has cleared itself. That's why we also call it a market clearing here. All right. If we bring it into demand and supply, you'd see that that is the point of the two things coming together here at this point here. Okay. Now, what happens when we have disequilibrium? So that's what's happening here. Let's say that prices go up, as it does in the diagram here, from 80 from 60 to 80. It leads to two things happening. At that higher price, you'd see this position here. So I should probably take this on to the and show you that on the whiteboard here. All right, so okay, so we have a situation here. So this is quantities demanded and supplied. So now we're looking at the market working together. All right. So we have our demand curve and our supply curve operating. So this is our supply curve. This is our demand curve. This is the equilibrium position, which we will call E. At that position, it determines two things: the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantities. QE here. What happens if prices go above the equilibrium? So if prices were to go up here to P plus 1, and we come across here, what's going to happen is two things. First, we're going to have a change in both demand, the quantities demanded and the quantities supplied. So at E now, suppliers at the higher price will want to bring more into the market space. Why? Because the higher price will encourage them to produce more. So that this is, as you'd see here, that increase in price will cause an extension in the quantities supplied. Seen here by the movement from E to F. But simultaneously, we'd have this situation happening here with demand. So the quantities demanded will fall because now we have a situation where the people will not want to purchase any more of these goods because the price has gotten high, so that the quantities demanded will fall. And that is, if we look at that situation there, that is a contraction in quantities demanded. All right. So what happens is that now we have an imbalance in the market, or what is called disequilibrium. So this is the quantities demanded here. Come down to this point here. This is the quantities demanded here. And this is the quantities supplied. So what do you think is happening here? This is QS. What is happening here? In the market right now, there's something called surplus taking place. So what is going to happen? So surplus goods mean that goods are sitting on the shelf or sitting in a store and nobody's buying it. So once a firm has goods sitting in the store, it means that their resources are tied up in the form of unsold product. They have to get rid of it. How do they get rid of it? Suppliers will then begin to offer the same products that they were quite willing to sell at the higher price P plus 1. They're going to start to reduce the product and offer it. And every time they reduce the product, they'll get rid of more and more, so that eventually what you have happening is that prices will tend back towards this and back to equilibrium, caused by the suppliers offering to lower their prices. So prices are going to tend back towards the equilibrium point. Am I making sense? How many of y'all go to because you could see this in action in the mall, in the food court. How many of y'all realize that in the food court on an afternoon, a lot of these stores sell their goods for they lower their prices on their food to get rid of it.
Yep.
All right, and this is why, because now they're left with surplus items that they didn't sell from the lunch period. So therefore, they usually get a little spike after when school time ends and that kind of stuff. But when it comes to 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, they're left there with food that more than likely cannot stay until the following day. So they have to get rid of it. So they prefer to get rid of it rather than keep it and it spoils. So they get something back for the food that they need. That making sense? So that's one place you can see it occurring. Now, what will happen if, in the opposite case, prices were to fall from PE down to, say, P -1? In this case here, we have a situation where we have disequilibrium occurring again. All right. So what's happening at this case here now is that the first thing that's going to happen is that the quantities demanded are going to increase. All right. Or the better phrase is that there's going to be a movement along the demand curve from point E to this point here, not F, but let's call this point H. All right, from E to H. That is, what is that? That is an extension in the quantities demanded. Yeah, that's the movement along the curve. So that phrase again, quantities demanded. Simultaneously, at that lower price, you'd have the reverse happening from the perspective of suppliers. Suppliers don't like that, so they will move from this point, from E, down to let's call that point G. Okay, this here is a what? This, and just to be all right, that is what's going to happen with supply, is that there will be a contraction in the quantities that makes sense. That's that movement from E to J here. Okay, so now we have this equilibrium. Now we have this here. We're coming back to the same, well, similar positions here. We have, this is now the quantities being supplied here, and over here, this here is the quantities being demanded in the second situation. So this is supply 2, D2. This is supply 1. This is sorry, quantities supplied 1. This is quantities demanded 1 in the first instance. All right. So now we have a situation, and what is taking place here? Anybody knows what this situation, when the quantities demanded exceed the quantities supplied, we call that a, anybody? We call that shortage, all right, or scarcity. All right, so what happens during this period? Can anybody tell me? So a lot of people want the good, but there's an insufficient amount of the good available. So how do you get your share? You get your share by offering a higher price to suppliers to be able to make sure you get yours. So in this case here, the consumers begin to bid prices up to make sure they get a share of the scarce resources that are available. People are willing to pay more for the thing that they want because there's not enough in the market. So that's going to cause prices to begin to push back up towards that equilibrium point here of E. You all follow that? So in the first case,
Yes, sir.
right? So in the first case, where there's a surplus, the firms will push prices back down. But in the case of shortages, the consumers push prices back up. Now, that actually is one of the things that causes ticket prices for popular shows to go up. Because the interesting thing about that is tickets for particular shows has a fixed supply. And to make sure you get your ticket, what you're willing to do is to pay a higher than market price for it. What causes that, or what that leads to, is something called scalping. You're familiar with that? You're familiar with scalping, right?
No,
No,
sir.
sir.
You don't know scalping when you go to a party and you meet people outside selling tickets at a higher price than the original price of the ticket. You all never came across that? When you
Yeah,
go
but
to
Yes,
a,
sir.
what was the name of
Yeah.
it?
it's called scalping. It's not looked upon as a, but people actually invest in it. They go
Oh,
and
yeah.
they buy a bulk of tickets and with the hope that the party scores, and they end up buying selling it on the night of the fete at a higher price. Maybe you can tell how bad it is because you might see, for example, on Facebook, you might see people begging people, hey, anybody have fete for this? Anybody have tickets for this for this party and that party and whatnot? That's the kind of thing that goes on.
I,
Yes, sir.
I used to tell them stories somewhere.
You always thought what?
They stole those tickets from Subway and trying to sell it.
No, 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 no. They didn't. They didn't. They invested in it because they understand how the party circuit works. Sometimes they lose. Sometimes a party promises to be a good party, but it doesn't score, and it's not a hit. And what ends up happening is that they end up having wasted the money, um, and they have to bear the loss. That's with any business transaction. You have to bear the risk of loss. We know that, right? So this is what this slide is trying to explain to you how, well, this series of slides is called maintaining equilibrium. So that at surplus prices or at high prices where there's a surplus in the market, the suppliers will, in order to get rid of the excess supplies, they will begin to offer lower and lower prices, right? But when we have shortages on the other hand, consumers begin to bid up prices to make sure that they get their share. And that therefore pushes prices back towards the equilibrium. The other issue that we have to look at is what happens when there is a shift in curves. What happens to the equilibrium? And that's what's going on here. If a non-price determinant of demand changes, the whole demand curve will shift, as we see here from D1 to D2. All right, so what ends up happening is there's actually a brand new equilibrium position here, in this case here, I. But before we get to I, a number of things has happened. So let's follow what it says there. This leads to a movement along the supply curve to the new intersection point at I. All right. Right. So in the figure, a rise in consumer income leads to the demand curve shifting from D2. Right. So leads to the demand curve shifting to D2. So we move from D1 to D2, and what they're saying that in this case here, what changed was consumer incomes. All right. That would lead to a shortage at that lower price. So people are still expecting to pay this price, but because their incomes have gone this way across from D to D2, demand has increased at all prices. This here would be a shortage. Why would this be a shortage? Because suppliers will not supply at that price anymore. Because you're seeing it here? suppliers are going to want to supply at that price now. So they're not willing to sell at this lower price because there's enough demand that's pushing up prices as well. All right. So this will cause prices to rise to the new equilibrium of PE2. Prices PE2. As, as it did so, there would be a movement along the supply curve. See the movement along the supply curve from G to I. And along the demand curve D2 from H to I. Because as the prices go up in the new demand curve, there's also going to be a contraction in the quantities demanded at the new higher price PE2, and it's going to cause, that higher price is going to cause an extension in quantity supplied, but a contraction in the quantities demanded, because they can't stay at the initial equilibrium. So that's how equilibrium prices change over time when there are various things happening in the market, causing the shifts, and those shifts bring with it small or contractions and extensions in quantities demanded and supplied. So you can see the opposite too if the demand curve, in this case here, it looked at a shift in the supply curve. So in this case here, the supply curve shifted, and they said that this one is caused by the cost of production is increasing. So the cost of some factors of production did rise, causing supply to move from S1 to S2 to the left, going backwards in this sense. And again, you have the same situation. The reduction in supply is going to eventually lead to a higher price because there's fewer supplies available. Initially, the demand will still want to be at this level here, but they can't get it. The price is going to go up because the demand has not changed. All right, so demand is going to there's going to be a contraction in the quantities demanded as the price goes up because of the shortages created in the market. All right, so you're following this. So movements or shifting of the demand curve or the supply curve would also lead to movements along the demand curves as the market gets back into equilibrium, because the market is going to want to always find equilibrium all the time. That making sense, guys?
Yes,
All
sir.
right, okay. Okay, to summarize, a shift in one curve leads to movements along another curve to the new intersection point. Sometimes a number of determinants might change. This might lead to a shift in both curves. When this happens, equilibrium simply moves from one point to the other, and all curves intersect to form new intersections. So what we're saying there is that it can happen with more than one once. So that if you're in a situation where the market, where there are multiple things happening in the market situation, you might find yourself with multiple switches taking place in the marketplace. So again, if we go to any market, you start with an equilibrium position. All right, so this is D1, this is S1. So if something interferes with, let's say, the demand and the quantities, it's not the quantities demanded, but demand changes as a result of a change in non-price determinants, then you have a shift. Let's say it's a positive change. Let's say income levels go up. So we now have a new equilibrium point coming here. But to get to that point, you have to have that newer higher price. You have a movement along the curve here by suppliers. So you have an extension in supply. Now, because of that, it might encourage, because of this new high price here now, because you have the higher price here now at equilibrium point 2, then it might bring on more suppliers into the market because the market looks very attractive now at that high price. So supply shifts to the right, to S2, as more suppliers come in. And as more suppliers come in, we get to this new equilibrium point E3, because and that will cause prices to go down, leading to another extension in quantities demanded along D2. So as a result of that and the prices coming down again, then you might find that you might have another demand change and so on. So you can have multiple shifts that can be utilized to describe circumstances. So let me ask you all a question and see if you all can answer it here. I'm just going to clear off the center, and I want you all to help me with this here. What would happen? What happens in the market for sorrel for Christmas?
The demand for it go up, so the price goes up as well.
So, but how? Why does it go up, and how would we depict it if this was a diagram reflecting the market for sorrel? Tell me how to draw it. So let's start first of all. This is the market for sorrel. We start with the original position. This is our supply curve 1, and this is our demand curve D1. So this is the first equilibrium position. What happens for Christmas, and how do we depict it? Come. Nobody? What causes our demand for sorrel to change at Christmas time? Is it a price determinant or non-price determinant that changes?
Non-price?
Right. So how do we depict a non-price change in demand? This is Christmas here. Seeing it?
I think it shifts the curve to the right.
Yes, it does. It shifts it to the right from D1 to D2, leading to a higher new equilibrium price. Seeing that? From D1 to D2. That will encourage more people to bring sorrel to the market to sell at that new higher price. So there's an extension in quantity supplied. Yep. So those people who are growing their sorrel for their own personal use, but at that higher price, they may be quite willing to put a table up on the side of the road and sell it. That brings it out to the market. Making sense? Okay. So when Christmas is over, what happens to the demand curve? The demand curve reverts back to its normal natural level. That way, it comes back down, and sorrel prices will return to some lower level. All right. When does it pick back up? Is Christmas the only time we'll be buying a set of sorrel? We tend to see it more at Christmas time, but it's always there in the market, huh? During its seasons. Carnival is another time that it happens. Say that again, Mr. Brooks.
No, let me say that.
All right. Can you think of any other good that works like this? What would happen to fish for Easter? You follow me? Fish will have a similar thing. Why is fish a big thing for Easter? What about ham for Christmas? Or its relation, pork? What about pastels and black cake?
Yes, sir.
You understand what I'm talking about? These
So like the Sally for Eid?
Correct. What is it that Eid and Diwali would have? That would suddenly pop up, will change demand wise. These are all non-price determinants here. These are all taste and fashion resulting out of, in our case, we have to think about our holidays, right? So during the holiday periods, it impacts upon our demand situation for different types of goods and services. So for Eid and Diwali, you might find a lot of people demanding more roti and curries. That makes sense? As opposed to any other
Yes,
time of
sir.
the year and so on. For
So
Easter,
similarly, would it be like going back to school in September, how you would see a lot of book bags and pencil and
correct,
books and
very
stuff?
good. You're starting to pick it up. That's a seasonal type of activity that comes up as a result of people preparing for school and that kind of stuff. All right. So it doesn't only hold for those seasons that we talk about like Christmas and that kind of stuff. We have other things. It's one that impacts upon us in Trinidad here. That's just kind of us. Long weekends. When a public holiday comes up, people demand for a lot of things, like especially alcohol, limon. I mean, now we have a situation where it kind of backed off a little bit, but alcohol in particular and parties, those are things that are influenced by the occurrence of a long weekend where public holidays, and that is something that falls into our tastes as a society. You follow? Some people might even describe it as something that like is a um, cultural norms. That makes sense? This is not supposed to be an O, by the way. Cultural norms, because we are accustomed to behaving in that manner. In fact, we look forward to when there are long weekends to facilitate beach lines and stuff like that. And with beach lines comes a whole host of different things that happens in terms of purchasing behavior and that kind of stuff. So much so that what happens is that suppliers begin to prepare and respond for it. So, for example, right now, grocery stores have already purchased their supplies of ham and pork, and people are getting ready to organize their pastel making and their black cake making, that kind of stuff, because they expect farmers have already planted up sorrel ready for what's going to happen in the for the Christmas period. Although right now the situation is kind of up in the air because we don't know what's going to happen based upon the situation going on with COVID. So that now you have another element, which is what we listed as a shock. Remember that we talked about random shocks. So we have that random shock that's impacting upon our circumstances right now. So a lot of people may still want to do something for Christmas, but they may not put out as much as they did before. And similarly, suppliers might feel as if the demand is going to be a bit depressed, so they may not put out as much as they did before, or they may hold back to see what's happening with the market. That making sense? Because and that speaks to the next one. There's an expectation that things are not going to be as good this Christmas as a result of the COVID virus. You're following how that whole thing works?
Yes, sir.
A lot of economies
Yes, sir.
is heavily dependent upon consumer expectations of how things would be. All right. So that brings us, I think, to the end of this particular thing, and I left this summary here. And in this summary, I was really saying to you guys that demand and supply is the cornerstone of economic studies. The whole concept of if you realize the price mechanism, market economies and stuff sits upon understanding demand and supply analysis. All right. Now, the other element that comes up with this is elasticity. And elasticity is a way of looking at how demand and supply um, is augmented by another concept. But go through this by Sunday. Everybody should try and get the the quiz completed, and then move into the elasticity area. All right, guys. Anybody has any questions they want to ask at this time for clarification?
No, sir.
All right. Did anybody come in? No. Okay. Did anybody come in while I was? I know some people left, but let's see. Just want to make sure my registration or my register is okay. Oh, Miss Barrett came in. I think I had her absent, right? She's here. Miss Sugram is here. Hi, Miss Sugram. Can't answer. Chanel is here twice. Okay. All right, guys. So, any questions? Anything you want clarified before we call it Jorge for the evening? I don't hear anybody.
Sir, good night.
Yes.
So you got that? Did you receive my draft for the assignment? And
Yes.
did you get a chance to review it?
No, not yet.
Oh, okay then, cool.
I
But
did
you
get
send
it.
an email.
Well, when you came in a bit late, right? I was saying that what I will do is I will message in the general chat for people to talk to people on a one-to-one basis about your assignment.
Okay.
All right.
All right, then, sir. Yeah.
All right. So no questions
sir,
about. Yes, Atiba.
Yes, sir. One more question pertaining to the turn it in, right?
Yeah.
When I turn it in, it said the similarity that is zero. That is the rating for the to see if you do any plagiarism.
Well, yeah, sort of. It looks at the degree of plagiarism, but it also looks at the amount of it's not really plagiarism so much as it's looking at the amount of work that you did in relation to the work that you use from other people. So we're saying you need to maintain about a 15% ratio. All
Okay,
right?
but if we don't say anything at all, you're good.
You mean you didn't see nothing at all?
No, it didn't read anything. No percentage didn't come up. It just said.
Sure.
It was just blank.
You sure about that? I'm looking at yours here. It says 9%.
Well, probably it didn't read in time. Well, at least I didn't pass the 15%. That's most important.
Yeah, well, now one of the things you're going to notice too, guys, is that when you do this report, you're gonna see a funny thing where it's gonna identify your title page and all kind of nonsense as coming up as being you could ignore that. Okay, if your title page and stuff is coming up as being copied, then and that's because you use the Costa title page. Don't worry about that. We could deduct that kind of 9% or that 10%. So you see here, Atiba, are you seeing this on your own?
Yes, sir. I was saying yes, sir.
Yeah, you see this here. It says 3% here. Item 1 submitted to the college. All right, and that brings up your table of contents. And that's because the phrases that are using here are coming from the question. But so therefore you could ignore that. All right.
Okay.
But what you want to do is like where it says this one comes from the Grand Canyon University. This is item 2. This is something you need to look at to see if maybe at this point you needed to do some in-text citation. But it doesn't look like that. These are just generic terms that came together. So don't worry about that one. It's if you start to get big clumps of your work coming from one thing.
Right.
That you have to pay attention to see if it's not just a coincidence or if it's like a whole paragraph, then something might be wrong with that, and you might have to do in-text citation and stuff with it. Okay.
Okay. All right, good. But so far, good.
So far, in terms of your similarity test, it looks okay. But as I
All
said, in
right.
terms of the actual content, I'll have to look at that and get back to you. But the nine
Sure.
percent score, the 9% score is a good score.
All
All
right
right.
then. Thanks. Yeah,
Okay.
I think I think I must was looking at the wrong thing or something like that.
No. It takes a little while for the report to come back. It's not immediate.
Oh,
It doesn't happen. Remember, they're going to take your assignment and compare it to internationally, yeah? And it
all right.
compares to our internal database as well as internet databases around the world. So it's going to take some time. Sometimes it takes up to about an hour or so for it to do a comparative. All right.
Oh, that's right. I didn't wait that long. I didn't see anything, so I'm assuming it was good, and I just emailed it to you. But I understand
No.
now. Thanks.
Okay, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, guys. Any questions? Anything that needs clarifying? All right, I'm going to turn off the recording now.